all you heroes, hawks, heralds, crows, pirates, and wardens. Welcome to the Dragon Age Lorecast, where we unpack, discuss, and galaxy brain about all the lore behind the Dragon Age series.
We are so excited to bring you this podcast. Every episode, we'll be talking about a different topic in the Dragon Age universe. From character deep dives to exalted marches and elven gods, we will cover it all.
There will be spoilers. And always remember, swooping is bad.
Hello and welcome to the Dragon Age Lorecast, where we talk about Dragon Age and its lore. We are so excited to be here as we continue in our book series. But first, I am here with my co-host.
That's me. I'm Shelby or She-Cup. Glad to be here.
Yeah, so Shelby, what are we talking about today?
So today we're actually kicking off a 3-part mini-series. And that mini-series is going to be on Tevinter Nights. And so you might be wondering, we've never done a 2-part, or I don't even think we've ever done a 3-part series. We've done a few 2-parters, but not on any of the books, I don't believe. So you might be wondering why this one. Well, and I have read Tevinter Nights before we started prepping for this episode series. Originally, we had decided like, hey, okay, we're just going to do this in one episode. We moved this episode up a little bit once Veilguard news started coming out, etc. And we got into doing research last week. And I didn't realize that this book was nearly 500 pages. So that's kind of the first thing. None of the books we've read so far have been that long. And so at first we were like, okay, well, we'll just split it into 2 episodes. And then we got into it and we were like, we're going to have a lot to talk about. And if we split it into only 2 episodes, that really only gives us like 6 or 7 minutes on each chapter. And we just felt like we want to talk about it more. And there's a lot of things to talk about. So with all of that being said, we decided to split it into 3 different episodes. So we'll be covering 5 chapters of Tevinter Nights in each episode. And we're covering the first 5 chapters today in this first part of the series. And so those chapters are 3 Trees to Midnight, Down Among the Dead Men, Horror of Hormak, Callback, and Luck in the Gardens. So the first thing that I want to tell you is that this was published in 2020, which is not that long ago. It's the newest book novel thing we have. And I remember when this book came out, we were either about to start the podcast. Yeah, we were just about to start the podcast. Like we started in 2021. And so this came out just a few months before. And even back then, I have always thought there are probably a lot of characters in this that will be companions in Veilguard, or DA4 as it was known then. But it wasn't really until now that we have, full information about the companions in Veilguard that I really realized how many people are in this book that are going to be in the next game. So that's something we'll talk about. But Tevinter Nights is a compilation of short stories. They've all got different authors. I think there may be a couple that wrote multiple, but there's a really good array of different authors. And the compilation is edited by Chris Bain, Patrick Weeks, Matthew Goldman, and Christopher Morgan. So there are 4 editors. And as I just mentioned, many of the characters we meet in this anthology will come up again.
So would you say this is the most important book to read before playing Dragon Age the Veilguard?
100%. Like, this is absolutely the most important thing to read in order to prepare for Veilguard. I think that there are going to be a lot of events that happen in this anthology that are important later. I think there's a lot of lore that comes from this anthology that we see also in other places, especially the missing, that come into play. But really and truly, I think this This is number one, far and away. This is the most important. I think we can also include Last Flight on the list, just because of all the Griffins stuff. But for sure, Tevinter Nights takes the cake.
All right, well, let's just dive right in to the first one. So we're covering
Okay.
5, as you said today.
Yes. So the first one we're going to talk about, and we're going to go in order throughout the book. We're not skipping around. The first one is called Three Trees to Midnight. And this one is written by Patrick Weeks. I will tell you about the setting. We'll talk about a little summary. We can highlight any main characters, and then we can give our reflections and our ratings at the end. So in the Three Trees to Midnight chapter, the setting is Ventus, the city of Ventus in Tevinter, and Arlathan. And it's happening as the Antom rebellion of the Qunari is sacking the city of Ventus. Quickly into the story, the main characters escape into Arlathan Forest. So during this chapter, what happens is Strife, a supposed Dalish elf, and Myrian, a supposed Tevinter magister, are captured by the Antom and chained to each other to do manual labor in the Qunari camp. They instantly, literally, from the very first moment, they hate each other and they make assumptions about each other, which is understandable due to their backgrounds. They assume the worst of each other and call each other names. Myrian calls Strife a slur of knife ear. Strife obviously, calls him a shem in response, but I don't really feel like that's a slur on the same level, but they pick at each other constantly. Strife also has a plan to escape the camp, but his plan is foiled when he realizes that his accomplice, Thaniel, has been given Kamek, a Qunari drug that essentially erases your mind and turns you into a mindless husk. Strife pivots as he and Myrian escape to the forest. The Qunari do soon follow, led by the leader of the Antom, this section of the Antom. The leader is called the Bostar, and along with him is another person named the Hunts Master. They continue fleeing and are eventually helped by the shapeshifter Ireland, who is a member of Strife's Dalish clan. Strife and Myrian eventually develop a friendship, learning that their assumptions about the other were incorrect. Myrian is not a magister. Instead, he is a lowly mage who lights the street lamps of Ventus and who barely escaped from slavery, while Strife is not originally a Dalish elf, but a city elf who was kicked out of Starkhaven for his angry temperament. Eventually, they do come face to face with the Bostar, who is ready to kill the two of them imminently. But instead of shooting Strife and Myrian with his bow, the Huntsmaster shoots Bostar. This is because the Huntsmaster is actually a member of the Ben Hassrath, sent to investigate what's been happening with the Antom. The story ends with Strife, Myrian, and Ireland going back to the Dalish camp together. So the main characters of this are Strife, Myrian, Bostar, Huntsmaster, and Ireland. So, do you have thoughts on the lore, any themes, any small moments that you enjoyed, etc.?
Stuff is not going well within the Qun. The fact that the Ben Hassrath has to investigate their own people, I feel like would be a big deal in Qunari society, which is kind of like that's the big reveal at the end. Yes, we get the big reveal with Strife and Myrian's backstories, but we all kind of assumed that there would be more to that. But the fact that Qunari infighting was not on my 952 Thetis bingo card.
Yeah, I mean, I think that it's been hinted at for a while that there's something coming among the Qunari, but I do feel like this is the first we get really of the Qunari is the Qunari race, their entire society really is they're undergoing a civil war. That's what's happening because you really have three branches of Qunari society. You have the Arakun, you have the Antom, and you have the Aragena. Those are the three branches. And the Antom has come onto mainland Thetis to attack mainland Thetis to gain a foothold without the permission of the Arakun and the Aragena. So they are doing this on their own. The Ben Hassrath is investigating what's happening, trying to figure things out. So that's a huge reveal. And I think this is going to be a major theme in Veilguard too. It's gonna be a problem that we have to solve.
Yeah, I definitely agree with that. But other than that, like I like Strife, I like Ireland, I like Myrian. The thing that really got me interesting is the Kamek. What got me interesting in here is this is a non-magical means of tranquility.
Well, and it's not just tranquility. It would be like if you made non-mages tranquil. Like they
Hmm.
give it to everyone because everyone in this camp, like they have already killed all the mages that were captured during the sacking of Ventus. Myrian slipped through the cracks, like he pretended he wasn't a mage. So well, and I should also mention that like Kamek is this is not the first time we've ever seen it. We see it in two, we see it in Those Who Speak, another comic, we see it in Inquisition. So this is not the first time this has come up, but I think the thing that is different about this is that the Antom is using this indiscriminately. They do not have a person who really knows how to apply it. And so they're giving them much higher doses than they would normally. So it's not just like a sedative at this point. Like they are literally taking away the personality, the humanity, like the ability of these people to be people. Like now they are literally just mindless husks. Like it truly reminds me of the husks from Mass Effect.
Right, and it very much gives me like, especially like the attitude of Bastar, um, reminds me of kind of the Arashok's attitude in Dragon Age 2 of this like I cannot stand to be in this city with its depravity, with its terrible like ethics. The city needs to be cleansed, so we're gonna cleanse and kill everything. I
Yeah.
feel like after the events of Inquisition with Corypheus, with the sky being torn open, that maybe the Antom is like, no, we have to go and do this.
Yeah, and I think there's a lot of their motivation that we don't understand or really know why yet. But I do think that that's something that's coming. So I like this chapter. There are a lot of things that make me like tilt my head a little bit. Like in the first verse or first line of the chapter, the first sentence is Myrian of Ventus didn't know much about Cunari. How does he not know much about Cunari? Like, I'm just confused how he doesn't know much when he literally lives in Tevinter, who's constantly being besieged by them. And I think in one of the other chapters, somebody says something about taking classes about Cunari. So I'm just like, Myrian, how do you not know anything? First of all, is the first thing that I want to bring up. But another thing that I think is interesting about this chapter, Strife and Myrian are at each other's throats the entire time. And
Mm.
they both make assumptions about each other. And I think that this is a big part of this story. They both make incorrect assumptions about the other. Strife assumes that Myrian has never suffered, has never had any struggles in life whatsoever. Strife looks at Myrian's hands and says, "Oh, those are soft hands, the hands of a privileged man." And Myrian looks at Strife as just another elf who hates everything to Venter unjustifiably. But in
Mm.
reality, those things are not true. Strife justifiably hates human society, and Myrian has just barely escaped from slavery. And there's a really interesting passage at the beginning where, right after they first get paired up, Strife calls Bastar a bastard, as a joke
Hmm.
to see how much he understands of the common language. And Myrian is pissed off. And Myrian, this is what it says. "You keep running your mouth like that, you'll get killed," Myrian said as they made their way across the grass, the chain hissing between them. "You're still a slave, idiot, only now you're a slave to beasts that will kill you as soon as look at you." "What would you know about it?" the elf asked. His voice wasn't friendly anymore, and when Myrian looked over, he saw that the elf was looking ahead at the forest. "You're no laborer, whatever tunic you wear." Myrian's breath hitched, and his grip tightened around the axe he carried. "You don't know what you're talking about, elf." "Strife," the elf said. "What?" "There's more than one elf around here. Call me Strife, and I know what I'm talking about better than you, I'd wager." Strife, if that's what he wished to call himself, still wasn't looking at Myrian, squinting ahead squinting instead into the trees ahead of them. The loose tunic hides your belly, but those nice rounded forearms say that you haven't missed many meals and you keep your head down out of fear, not habit. Myrian jerked his hands up into his sleeves. At least I keep my head down at all. The thing I think that is interesting about this particular passage is that to me, it shows that oppression is manifesting differently in different people. Strife is reacting to his oppression and the oppression of the elves in a very antagonistic way. Whereas Myrian, because he comes from Tevinter, because he comes from this very stratified class of people where he is on the lowest, maybe not the lowest totem pole, but pretty close to the lowest part of society, he has learned to be much more subservient almost to the people who are quote unquote ahead of him. And so they're coming at this from very different standpoints. And I think that their reactions are so interesting because of it. Because Strife, as we know, he is more angry. And because he's on the outside of human society, he lives in the forest with the Dalish, he has frankly, the luxury to be angry, to have that kind of aggressive stance. Whereas Myrian, because he's surrounded constantly by people who put him down, he does not have that luxury. And normally, you know, when we think about elves versus humans in Dragon Age, we think, oh, elves are the most oppressed and humans are higher than them. And that generally is true. And I'm not saying that's not true in this situation, but in this situation, there are parts of both Strife and Myrian's stories that the other does not fully understand. And I think that that's a really interesting place to start from in this story.
The difference between like Strife being able to be angry because he's outside and like he wants to challenge and bring down these societal things, whereas Myrian is very much trying to survive in a way that he knows how, of avoiding slavery. It doesn't mean that he's not privileged, and he obviously has his own biases or whatever, but it's like a different outlook, as you said, on oppression, and I think really undoes the like oppression Olympics kind of.
Mm-hmm. Another really important theme that I wanted to bring up in this chapter is really about the Antom. And I know we probably need to do just a whole episode on the Antom Rebellion, but something that I find fascinating is I think that the Antom Rebellion is almost anti-intellectual. And we don't know much about, you know, kind of the political stances of the Antom when it comes to, you know, this kind of stuff. But there's a reaction and interaction between Bostar and the Huntsmaster that I want to read from. So this is really before they catch up with Strife and Myrian. This is on page 29 if you're following along. And the Huntsmaster has his huge bow and he is looking at a gull in the forest. The Bostar says, "Will you kill it?" And this is what the text says. For a moment, the Huntsmaster did not respond. Then, without turning, he said, "It is no threat. The path of the Cune does not call for needless violence." Your arrow is already knocked, Bastar pointed out. The path of the Cune does not call for wasted effort. Why draw back your bow if not to use it? For a long moment, the Huntsmaster looked at the black gull in the distance. I wished to know whether I could strike a target from such a distance. Slowly, with perfect control of his movements, he relaxed the bow and returned the arrow to its quiver. Bostar glowered at the Huntsmaster. This is why he thought less of Antom, who did not fight on the front lines. Even the black and white striped vitar that painted the Huntsmaster's face was drawn to symbolize sight, finding rather than battle and power as befitted the Antom. And now? The Huntsmaster smiled faintly. Now I know. You know nothing, Bastar snapped. You did not kill the gull. To not know something is foolishness, the Huntsmaster said. To know by doing is experience. To know without needing to do is wisdom. It was one of the sayings of the Qun, one of the talky lessons that Bastar had never cared for. The parts about obeying orders and non-followers of the Qun getting ground into dust had always been his favorites. This wastes our time and you are needed, he said to the huntmaster, stifling a growl. 2 prisoners escaped, and 1 may be a mage. So in this passage, we really see the huntmaster being more philosophical, thinking, having wisdom. And at every time, the Bastar is like, no, that's foolishness. You shouldn't be thinking. You should be attacking. You should be following my orders. And I do feel like this reeks of anti-intellectualism, which is really an interesting tack strategically for the Antom to be taking. And I think it does make sense for the Antom, the military organization, to kind of reject any philosophy, any, let's think about what we're doing, while the ones who typically teach, the ones who are typically teachers, have not approved what the Antom is doing.
It's really a kind of difference that we see in like the Arashok, who is like, this is kind of overzealous. We follow the Qun to the letter. And everything about that, everything has its place because everything needs its place. And the world should submit to the Qun. When we view like Bull, a member of the Ben Hasrith, former, depending on your choices, who talks more about like, no, like the Qun is freedom. In knowing your place in society, there's a freedom to like let go and live. Of like knowing that and like a more philosophical and more like deeper understanding of that. So I feel like we've already seen that difference, but this just, like you said, kind of like further drives home the point.
Right. And I do think it's really dangerous. Like, it's a very dangerous place for the Antom to be. I think it's dangerous for any military organization when you have refused to think strategically, or when you've refused to think philosophically about the actions you're taking. It's very easy to, become genocidal, to take actions that are war crimes. When you have a military, you have to think and reflect on your actions and whether or not this is the right path to take. Sometimes it is the right path to take, and other times, no, you're just fighting for vengeance, or you're just fighting to get something, to get whatever you want, whether it's land or resources or whatever. And I do think that the Antom are very much leaning into that place of, we're just fighting to get ahead. We're just fighting to eradicate this people that we disagree with. And that's a very dangerous thing for Thetis.
All in all, I think I liked this chapter too. It's a very, very like strong opening, especially given where Inquisition ends. 10 out of 10 for me, really.
Yeah, I just have one more little passage that I want to read, and it's the very end. And I think this is for sure the best part of this chapter. Like, I didn't see this twist coming. I just thought, okay, they're just going to run away. Like, Ireland's going to come back and help them, whatever. It'll be fine. But as you know, as I've mentioned at the beginning, Strife calls the Bastar bastard so that he can kind of figure out how much of the language the Bastar and Huntsmaster understand. And this is what the chapter says at the end. Huntsmaster, the Bastar shouted, his legs still kicking as he grasped at the chain around his throat. Do your duty. Destroy those who threaten the Qun. Yes, called the Huntsmaster. That's the idea, Bastard. A sudden, shocked silence washed across the clearing as the Huntmaster tossed his bow aside. Antom, to me, Bastar choked out. I am not Antom, the Huntsmaster smiled, as the Qunari beside him looked at him in confusion. In one fluid motion, he swung the spear down from his back and hurled it across the clearing. Bastar shuddered as the spear struck, then went silent and still. Now weaponless, the Huntmaster raised his hand, and then, as though they stood at a fancy ball, he placed a hand across his waist and bowed politely, his stoic expression melting into a polite smile beneath the face paint. I am Sarbrak, of the Ben Hasrith, he said, and the other Qunari scrambled away, turning their backs on Myrian and Strife and the bear as though he were suddenly the greatest threat. I heard rumors, he said, walking forward and looking to the Cunari in the clearing, that the Antom who took Ventus did not act in accordance with the Cune. He sounded disappointed. Some of the boss now call us monsters. He gestured up at Myrian and the others on the hilltop. And they are not wrong. This is what threatens the Cune.
Yeah, like I said, I think 5 out of 5 for this one. Well written, well crafted story. I really enjoyed the characters.
I have to agree. Definitely a 5 out of 5 for me as well. The next chapter is called Down Among the Dead Men, and it's written by Sylvia Fekete. Again, as I said last time or 2 weeks ago, if you know how to pronounce her last name and I'm not pronouncing it right, please let me know. And so this chapter is set in Navarra City, in Navarra, of course. And the summary is basically Audric, a city guardsman, is brutally attacked by the reanimated corpse of Penric Karn during Karn's funeral. Audric is then sent to the Mournwatch, which is a subset of the Mortalitasi mages, to help Myrna and Emmerich figure out why he was attacked. They go to the Grand Necropolis, where they learn that Karn has now been possessed by a pride demon. Myrna and Audric also find out that Karn was killed in a duel with Duke Janus Van Markham, who was, again, killed in the duel as well. So both Karn and Van Markham die in this duel they have. Myrna then takes Audric down into the Grand Necropolis, again, this time to visit the tomb of Van Markham. But while they're there, they are attacked by Karn, and Audric is stabbed by Karn. However, this does not kill Audric because he is already dead. He was indeed killed by Karn at the funeral, but Audric had not realized it yet. So when they find Karn again for the third time, Audric challenges him to a duel for killing him. Myrna destroys Karn when he breaks the rules of the duel. Back in Emmerich's study, Myrna offers Audric the choice to work under a Mournwatcher, and he accepts working under Myrna and is given charge of the library. In this story, Audric is really being possessed by a spirit, and he is being possessed by a spirit of curiosity. And so the characters in this one are Audric, Myrna, Karn, Emmerich, and Manfred. And this is the first story we have, and this is only the second chapter, but this is the first one where one of our companions makes an appearance. And that's obviously Emmerich and his skeletal assistant of Manfred. I think we can pretty much say Myrna's probably going to make an appearance in Veilguard as, maybe a side character, a quest giver, etc.
Yeah. I found this one interesting because it very much reads like the opening chapters to Asunder, which we haven't talked about yet. But like with like Cole not really realizing like what's going on and all of that stuff. It just reminded me of that.
I do think there are some similarities here for sure. Specifically around the fact that they don't realize that they're spirits. And, Myrna, I'm not really sure what page it's on, but she has a conversation with Audric about this. And she basically suggests that the reason he doesn't realize is because he has unfinished business on Earth, because there's things he wanted to do that he could never accomplish. And I think that rings true for Cole as well. There was a life that he never got to live, both of them. And for Audric, it's really an academic life. The library, he loves architecture, and that's where Audric is really, that's where his passion lies. And I think it's so interesting to have a spirit of curiosity. I don't think we've ever seen one before, but it's very interesting and well written the way that this chapter proceeds. We get very tiny glimpses of what's coming, but you don't really put it all together, again, of course, until the very end. And I think the biggest way that we see this is twofold. So on the very first page 51, Audric is in like the Mournwatch place. No, he's not. I'm sorry. He is in the place where Penric Karn's funeral is happening. And somebody's reading from the Chant of Light, and Audric, this is what it says about him. Audric's eyes wandered to the majesty of the copper-tiled vaults. This temple complex had been built to celebrate the retaking of Navaran lands, 365 towers helmed by King Caspar II, long may he rest. That it was a marvel among the city of marvels didn't diminish the glittering craftsmanship. What did sour it was the dead man on the bier behind them. Audric squirmed at the thought of the hollow pits that were his eyes. Curiosity, his father had said in their clay-walled home on the outskirts of the city. That was Audric's trouble. Curiosity and too much schooling for a boy that wakes up crying from nightmares, my lad. So we see the curiosity is already there. And this happens before Karn even kills him. And so we're getting this foreshadowing. And then after, when he is dead, but before the reader knows it, he's asking so many questions. And this is the thing that I find so interesting. I didn't notice this the first time I read it, but now on this reread, it's obvious. And from probably halfway through the chapter, I'm like, oh my God, Audric is asking so many questions. And so I went through and I counted. And to prove just how curious he is, Audric asks 30 questions. 30 questions. This story is 23 pages long. So that means he is asking a question on every page and then some. So he's asking a question on multiple pages, or asking multiple questions on one page throughout the story. So to me, that is phenomenal writing. That is great writing to have that kind of foreshadowing before we really have gotten to the point of, yes, he is a spirit of curiosity. So I really, really appreciated that.
Yeah, I definitely agree with that. That's a good thing. I didn't have like a super lot of reflections. I know we talk about this particular story in our spirits episodes. Basically, like if you want to learn about Emmerich, like this is the place to do it.
Yes. Yeah, for sure. And Emmerich is not really a main character in this, but he does make a few appearances. We get a little bit of a glimpse into his study. Audric is kind of freaked out by Manfred, and Emmerich is like, oh, don't worry about Manfred. Like, he's fine. So we do get a few little short glimpses of that. I think the thing that I enjoyed most about this chapter is the look into Navarra and Navaran culture, and we'll get a few more chapters in Navarra, but I think this one especially gives us so much insight into how their beliefs really differ from the rest of Southern Thedas. And I mean, they differ from Tevinter too, but I kind of exclude Tevinter because they're just so different from everybody else. But Navarra, I feel like, has the most distinction in their theological and really their beliefs on eschatology too, their beliefs on like what happens after you die. Like all of this is so different from everybody else. And I think that that's interesting and something I really want to learn more.
Yeah, me too. Yeah, I still enjoyed this story. It was well written again. I give it a 4.5.
Yeah, I gave this one a 4. So I agree. I think this one's really well written. And I liked it a lot. But I think now will be a good time to go to the mid-break because we're going to come back and talk about probably the most horrifying story next. So turning it over to you.
Yes.
What is this? A new book? All this shit is weird. Oh, Varric, that is a terrible title. What are you even thinking?
That book you were reading this morning, Assyrian Spear. I don't think he had a spear in the legends.
He does in this one. Read the description.
Andraste knelt before no man but her maker. But she hadn't counted on the Archon Hessarian. Can Hessarian penetrate the tight-knit defenses of the warrior prophetess? Will she be prepared to face the full blast of his power? Wait a minute. Isabella, this is a vulgar thing.
You want to borrow it?
No!
You sure? It has pictures.
Not listening, I'm not listening.
Varric, does Hawk ever autograph books?
Why? Doesn't your copy of The Tale of the Champion have a big hole in it?
Yes, but it could also have Hawk's signature on it.
Welcome to the middle of the show where we take some time to thank our patrons. Thank you to all of our patrons who support us. Thank you to our first patrons, Genesis and Lisa M. If you want your name read out on the show, if you want to support us, you can do so by joining the Patreon. All patrons get their name read out on the first episode that we have after you have joined, or we're notified that you have joined. And then if you want your name read out on every episode of the show, join our Divine or Nug tiers on Patreon. You get that name read out on every show and so much more. If you want to come on the show once a month, you need to join the first Enchanter tier or higher, and you come on the show, chat with us. We just recorded our patron chat. Another great way to support us is to leave us ratings and reviews. If you leave us 5 stars and some kind words, we will read it out on a future episode of the show. And so I have a review to read that comes from Apple Podcasts. This comes from Shadow Llewellyn and says, "Can't get enough of this podcast. Where has this podcast been all my life? This podcast is everything I could want in a podcast about Dragon Age. I have a profound love for BioWare games since I started playing Origins on the 360 in 2017. The hosts do an exceptional job at researching and explaining the lore in each episode. I love hearing about their insights into the lore they discover. I work in a warehouse for 10 to 11 hours a day, and I'm happy to listen and learn more about Dragon Age every day. I am currently in Season 3 and have a lot of catching up to do, but I can't wait to hear their thoughts on Veilguard. I can't get enough of Dragon Age, and after discovering this podcast, that love has grown even more. For anyone who is looking for more about Dragon Age, this podcast is for you. I can't recommend it enough and hope more people discover them. And as His Majesty King Alistair says, to those who made that choice, swooping is indeed bad." Thank you so much, Shadow Llewellyn, for that review. If you'd like to review us, please do so. It really helps the podcast. You can also come hang out with us on Discord. You can join the Discord, the Cups Podcasting and More Discord. Come hang out, talk about Veilguard, talk about whatever, check out our other shows. All that's found there. And then you can also find that information on our website, cupspodcasting.com. And that is also where you can find our merch store, where you can get fun shirts like the Lord Secret Lambert Hate Club. And I think that's all I have for the middle of the show.
The past years have been so busy. We have earned at least a few moments of rest. A calm night out sounds... Oh, bravo! Bravo! Was the woman in gold playing a king? Who was the man in feathers? Oh, it's all very simple. The first actor's mask is determined by... well, I will lend you the program guide. But tell me, did you enjoy the performance? That was one of the greatest things I've ever seen. Truly. That part with the glittery, and they actually set fire to... Yes, I truly enjoyed it. Then I call tonight a great success.
I've got some of it written down now.
Give it here. Her breasts strained against the leather jerkin like 2 wild stallions corralled against their will. She pounced, the smooth moves of a jungle cat, and locked her thighs around Donnic's waist. He...
What?
Nothing. What is that?
Isabella just thought she'd celebrate your love affair with a written dedication.
It's friend fiction. I do it out of love.
I will never, ever be clean again.
You fear barbarians will swoop down upon you.
Yes, swooping is bad.
Okay, so let's get into the next chapter, which is unequivocally my least favorite and most hated chapter. However, it's also, I think, the best written chapter. Like, it is so freaking good, but it is so horrifying. Like, I don't know what John Epler put into this chapter, but it gives me nightmares. Like, it truly gives me nightmares. I've read this chapter like 3 times now, and it makes me want to throw up every time I read it. I'm convinced I actually, I have no idea. I don't know how he came up with this. This chapter is terrifying, but it is so good. So buckle up. Let's get going. So, The Horror of Hormak by John Epler. The setting, again, is Navarra, specifically the fallen dwarven thaig of Hormak. So in this story, Senior Warden Ramesh and Junior Warden Lesha are sent on a rescue mission to find a missing group of Grey Wardens who were led by Ramesh's friend and would-be lover, Jovis. They are somewhere in a Navarran forest when everything begins to feel eerie. They don't necessarily have any specific thing that they can point to that's wrong, but they just have a feeling. And the horses are nervous too. Other animals are nowhere to be seen. And there's a weird smell of brine in the sea. Then a warden recruit escapes and finds them. This is warden recruit Friedel. She is raving mad. Everything she says makes no sense whatsoever. The next morning, warden recruit Friedel has escaped from their camp. She's chewed through her bonds because they had to restrain her. And when Ramesh finds her, she's dead. She has chewed through her like skin, tendons, and ligaments in her wrists to get out of her bonds. And right after Ramesh finds her, her body violently explodes gallons and gallons of a grayish, viscous liquid it smells like the brine and sea smell that they've been smelling the whole time they've been in the forest. Ramesh and Lesha, soon after this, find an entrance to the deep roads with a sign noting that this was once Hormak Thaig. They also find signs left by the previous company of wardens, and these signs warn them not to follow. Do not rescue us. We know we have marched to our death. Don't come looking for us. As you can probably imagine, Ramesh and Lesha do not listen to this warning. They ignore the signs, and they go looking for the company anyway. They are soon attacked by a company of mutilated darkspawn. These darkspawn have different body parts, with one having a bird-like head and another that has a scorpion tail. After they defeat the darkspawn, they venture further into the ruins, where things begin to look a little bit more ancient elven rather than ancient dwarven. There are murals with repeating symbols of an elven queen/priestess, a supplicant, and a monster. Eventually, they come upon a room with a lyrium crystal as a chandelier and a giant, monstrous centipede that has the torso and head of Warden Jovis. Jovis is still minimally aware of who he is. And as Ramesh and Lesha enter the room, he tries to warn Ramesh to leave and destroy the chamber. And his reasoning for this is because we cannot let her have it again. That is the direct quote. We cannot let her have the chamber again. The her is left ambiguous, but we can talk about who this is going to be after the summary. And so after Jovis kind of gives them this warning, he loses his consciousness. The monster takes over and attacks. Lesha is the one that sacrifices herself in order to collapse the ruins and give Ramesh the chance to warn the other wardens. And the reason why he has to warn the other wardens is because they find out that there are actually 12 of these chambers all throughout Thedas. And this is just one of those 12 chambers.
With this one, I want to talk about everything that's not the horror, just because I know that's going to be the bulk of this. I just want to talk about, because a lot of these stories are like very much setting up what's going on in Thedas post-Inquisition, like what is happening with the Inquisition. I want to read just a little bit from, this is really early in the book. This is where Ramesh is reflecting on rescue missions with the wardens. On a rescue mission, you always took more wardens than you had lost to carry out the living and more practically so you could kill whatever the previous group had not managed to kill. Numbers helped on that front. But those rules had been written before Advent, before Ostagar, when they still had the numbers to keep patrols wherever they were needed. And I just think, like, with the wardens is that I think because, like, especially with Awakening DLC, we think the wardens are in a good place after Origins and Awakening. Like, we're on the up and up to building them, but like this shows that, like, no, you're still feeling the effects of Ostagar. Because hundreds, if not maybe thousands of wardens died at Ostagar.
Yes, this was one of the things I wanted to bring up too. I had it highlighted because I think it's significant. And I think the events of all the games have really decimated the Grey Wardens. We can exclude Dragon Age 2 because there's really not much there. But we know, Ostagar itself killed a bunch of wardens. We know that the events at Adamant in Inquisition killed a bunch of wardens. We know that Anders killed quite a few wardens before he escaped them. And so, you can make choices after Adamant that kills even more wardens. And so it's kind of like all they've done is lose wardens. And I think that something that we don't think about very often is because the fifth blight was so quick, it was only a year, they probably did not have a lot of people coming into the Grey Wardens to kind of like replenish them. They didn't have a lot of people who heard, oh, there's a blight on the way, I'm going to go and do my duty, I'm going to go become a Grey Warden so I can fight the blight. They didn't have that because it was contained to Ferelden and Ferelden only. In all of the other blights, they've lasted for years and years and years, if not hundreds of years. And so they would have tons of everyday people throughout Thedas who maybe didn't have any other options, who thought, okay, well, I'll just go do this so I don't have to be a farmer in some podunk town for my whole life. That was not something that happened during the fifth blight because it didn't last for that long. And there are still people in Thedas who deny that the fifth blight even ever happened. So all they've done is lose followers, lose people die, people be killed since the fourth blight. And when you've had, rebellion after rebellion in the Grey Wardens, when you've had Grey Wardens try to stage a coup against kings and queens, you're not going to be looked on very favorably. And so there has not really been an incident in Thedas that has caused people to flock to the Wardens. Now, I think the only thing you can really argue is Corypheus. Corypheus coming back as a Darkspawn, people seeing that, I think, could be one of those incidents that leads people to the Grey Wardens. Maybe some of the Inquisition people went to the Wardens after to continue kind of that fight. Who knows? I don't know if that's real. I think that's something that could potentially have happened, but we also know there's so much infighting in the Wardens right now, and we know that all the Wardens have been called back to the Anderfels. So we don't really know what's going on with the Wardens right now. I think this is another thing, like we've said, that's going to be discussed in the game. But the Wardens for sure are struggling. They just are.
Furthermore, like, the events of Adamant did irreparable damage to the Warden's public relations. I mean, especially since you can banish them from Orlais as a result. I mean, not everyone decides to do that, but that is an option.
Okay. Do you have any other thoughts about any of the non-horror stuff? Or are you ready to move on to that?
I'm ready to move on.
Okay.
It is so interesting because I don't know if you're ready to talk about who the her is.
Well, obviously, it's that there's one person that it is. And if you know anything about Dragon Age lore, you know who it is.
Right. So the her is probably Gillenon.
Yeah.
But Gillenon would be trapped behind the veil of this. Who did these experiments on Jovis?
So here's what I think. I don't think anyone did this to them. I think that Gillenon set up this chamber and then she got sealed behind the veil, right? And I think she's been behind the veil. But I think these chambers were created by her. When she joined the Evanurus, when she became a god, they said, you have to give up these monsters, these creations, or you can't be part of us. And so she did. So I think these chambers are either leftover, the things that she gave up, or they're things she hid from the Evanurus. Those are the options. And I think that they have stayed like without people touching them. I don't think that anyone did these experiments on these Darkspawn and Wardens. I think that the gray viscous liquid is what has done it. I think that them touching it has been what transforms them into these monstrosities. That's what I think is happening. I don't necessarily think, oh, Gillenon's back. She's been experimenting. She's the one that did this. Because if you remember, Jovis's warning is we can't let her get this again. So it sounds like they think she's coming back. And I mean, frankly, from the showcase of Dragon Age the Veilguard, she is coming back. I think that Gillenon is one of the Evanurus that we saw coming through the veil when Solus is trying to tear it down. So yeah, she is coming back, period. But that's my take. That's what I think is happening. Some of that is an interpretation, but I think it's left ambiguous on purpose.
I'm going to offer an alternative. I don't necessarily think this could be is the case, but I think it could be. It's just Chantry like lore and like what we've seen in pictures that all the Tevinter Magisters were men. We do not actually have confirmation that they were all men.
True.
And we know that a woman can be a Magister in modern day Tevinter. I can't remember our Tevinter episode right now at the top of my head, but I'm pretty sure that there wasn't some like magical like day where they're like, okay, women, you can be Magisters now. It's possible that we're dealing with another kind of Corypheus architect, because if the architect and Corypheus exist, in my opinion, it means that there are at least at one point or 5 others just like them. So perhaps this her is another super souped up Tevinter Magister who discovered this from Gillenon and is trying to recreate it, thinking that it is an old god experiment thing.
I could see that. I think I would be more inclined to agree with that theory if we did not have all of the mosaics and paintings that feature the 3 symbols of the elven priest, the supplicant, and the monster. I think if we didn't have that part of the story, I would be very inclined to agree with you. But for me, because of the mosaics, given everything we know about Gillenon, to me, it's unambiguous. This is Gillenon's handiwork. Now, whether or not it's been here for a long time or whether or not she found out a way to come back across the veil, that's up for interpretation. But I do personally, this is very clearly the work of Gillenon.
No, I agree with that. Like the experiments themselves, like the whole design, the brine, all of that stuff, Gillenon 100%. I'm more saying that who is doing these experiments? What is causing the experiments to Jovis and the other wardens that are so very clearly done recently?
I gotcha. I do think if there was any member of the Evanurus who would be able to find a way back across the veil. So I do think it would either be Gillenon or Falindin. Gillenon, I think, has the benefit of not originally being an Evanurus. And so maybe there was something about her being a human that allowed her to stay, being a human originally, or not a human, being a mortal originally that allowed her to kind of stay when Solus created the veil. I don't know. I could see that being an argument too.
The elven gods are not happy, let's hold hands and be hot grandmas like Flemeth is.
No, not at all. All right. So let's move on to the next chapter. And this one is called Callback, and it's written by Lucas Christensen. And the setting is in Skyhold after the Inquisition has been disbanded. And so in summary, Sutherland, Voth, and Shade, who create a adventuring company similar to the Bull's Chargers during the events of Inquisition, They are sent to investigate Skyhold, which has been preserved, but the fortress has been defanged. Skyhold's caretakers had sent a message about restoring the fresco, and then they went silent. Sutherland suspects that his company has been sent because they're small enough to disappear, and because those that sent him want their company to disappear, so that Skyhold and the Inquisition can be removed from history entirely. When Sutherland and company arrive, they find one of the caretakers has been gutted and nailed to the stable. The rest have been dismembered, their body parts hanging from the rookery's cages. The culprit quickly appears, a demon of regret, his body formed out of the plaster of Solas's murals to the Inquisitor. The demon has multiple eyes and looks like a wolf that has absorbed a dragon. It claims to be the regret of a god. The company is quickly neutralized except for Sutherland because he has no regrets. Backup arrives as planned. Rat, his squire, but also Dagna, Harriet, Morris, Cabot, and Ellen Vimal, all people from the Inquisition who were loyal enough to be quiet, small enough, not necessarily like high profile, so low profile enough to go missing without people wondering where they went. With his friend's trust in him, Sutherland lures the demon, saying that he regrets acting alone, using his friends and the present moment just like the demon itself. Then the rest of Sutherland's company attack, and they send it back to the Fade. With Skyhold safe once again, Divine Victoria writes a proclamation commending those who have served the Inquisition, but telling them to attempt no travel to Skyhold, and instead let the past guide them to a new direction. And so the main characters of this are Sutherland, Voth, Shade, Rat, Regret, Dagna, Harriet, Morris, Cabot, and Elon. I think this one is the story that has the most characters in it for sure.
Yeah, I really enjoyed this chapter just because I liked learning like kind of post Inquisition Skyhold stuff and like seeing Sutherland again. I really liked that Sutherland when he faces the regret demon and he's like, you brought me here thinking that I regret all of these choices, but this is the place where I found my life again. So there's not a single regret I have in this place. And I just really like that of like, and he talks about in the beginning, I can't remember exactly where it is, but he talks about when fighting a demon, you have to know exactly what kind of demon you're fighting. So you know who to send or who not to send or what to do. Like, which I really liked that kind of lore thing of like people do understand demons and like these strategists, especially non-mages, understand these demons.
And another thing, speaking of the demon aspect of it, like this is a pride demon that is named regret. Like this is not a regret demon. This is not a new type of demon. It's an interesting but subtle distinction. And I think it totally fits with Solas, right? Because his actions are so prideful. And they lead him to regret, but he's too prideful to admit that. And I think that it's interesting because, again, Solas means pride. And not only that, but the demon is shaped like Solas. It's a wolf that has absorbed a dragon. Like that is what Solas does to Mythal. And so it's very interesting. I love that little callback just to, build on the name of the chapter. But I think the thing that I love most about this chapter has nothing to do with Solas. It has nothing to do with demons. And it has everything to do with the characters. There are two kind of parts to this. The first is that I love that this company comes back. And when I first played Inquisition, the first few times, I never did anything with Sutherland. I just thought he was a random guy that you could talk to in the Herald's Rest. But he has a whole line of quests. And the quests that you can do with him are war table missions that allow him to establish his company. And it means the world to Sutherland that the Inquisitor took an interest in him. And it really changes the course of his life. And I love that. I love when you can do that as the main character in a video game. You can help this like small random side quest that then goes on to have a huge impact. And so for me, I never did Sutherland's Quest until I read this. And now I'm like, okay, well, every time I have to do it. But going along with that, the other thing that I appreciate about this chapter is that it demonstrates how much all of these tiny side characters who have a very small interaction with the Inquisitor, they have their own relationships with one another. They have their own friendships. They have their own inside jokes. They have their own, parties. Like they hang out without the Inquisitor and they have these friendships. And I really appreciate that. It's a small touch. And this chapter demonstrates it really well because clearly Sutherland, like he knows all of these people from the Inquisition that, we only see very occasionally. And so I very much appreciate that.
The Inquisition might be disbanded, but they're still kicking.
Yeah, like the Inquisition as an entity, as an organization, as an institution might not be around anymore, but the relationships that were built during this time, they still exist. And that's one of the things that I do love about this game series. I think we're going to see more of that in Veilguard. I don't think that's going to end. Obviously, like Harding's coming back. Varric is coming back. Dorian has to come back. Like, we know this. The Inquisitor's coming back. Solus is coming back. So we're going to see those relationships on display again, even though in this game, the Inquisition is not around. So I'm very excited for that.
That's really all I have about this one. This one was probably the quickest read out of all 5 that we had today.
Yes. So what was your rating on this one, Austin?
I give it a 4.
All right. I think I would give it a 3. It was not my favorite. There are things I appreciated, but there were some things that I just didn't love about it. I think this one is one of the weaker ones. There are definitely, again, like I said, the whole demon appearance is fascinating. But I think that this chapter is hard because it follows the Horror of Hormak. It's such a good chapter that I think it's hard. It's hard to follow that one. All right, so the last chapter that we have is called Luck in the Gardens. And this one, again, is written by Sylvia Fekete-Kuti. And this one is interesting. I have a little bit of a theory about this one, but we'll get into that later. This chapter is fascinating for a lot of reasons because it's really, I think there are a lot of chapters in Tevinter Nights as a whole that do a lot of different things, that do a lot of experimenting in terms of the writing style. But this is the first one I think that does that. This one is written in first person, which is a change. All of the others had been written in third person. And so this one changes to I. That is how the narrator writes it. It's very much written as a person is narrating a story. So it begins with a person reflecting on their life. Like, oh, I've been called a bunch of different things. I've been called a liar, a knave, a scoundrel. And somebody kind of interrupts them and is like, oh, a lord of fortune, and you're shunning luck. And so we see in this first paragraph that it is a Lord of Fortune is the narrator, and they're telling a story about something that happened to them. They're looking back. And so they're telling this story in a tavern. I think I assume that. I'm not sure it tells us, but they're telling this story in a tavern in Daresmud in Ravane. So that is where the story occurs, but the action that is told within the story occurs in Minrathous. So the setting is kind of twofold, that it happens in Ravane and it happens in Tevinter. So that's the first thing to know. The second thing to know is that narrator, the person that is telling the story, is unnamed. The name that they are given about halfway through the chapter by Dorian is Hollix, but that's an alias. We don't actually know this person's name. So with that, let's get into the summary. An unknown voice opens this story as narrator. It's written in first person. And we eventually learn that the narrator is a Lord of Fortune nicknamed Hollix by Dorian Pavis. Hollix is telling the story from Ravane set in Tevinter, and in the story, Hollix is hired by Magisters Dorian Pavis and Maevaris Talani to eliminate a monster/demon of some kind, nicknamed Kekarax, that lives underneath Minrathous. Hollix meets a street urchin named Mizzy, who points them in the direction of the monster, underneath the city. Hollix jumps down under the city, under Minrathous, and is almost felled by the beast. Later, Hollix goes to the gardens, where they realize that the beast is hiding in plain sight. The group all plans to lure the monster into the gardens, and eventually they do. Kekarax appears, open, kind of at the top, and the monster has a ring of dozens of heads on its head, like it's kind of a crown, and it has no eyes, and it calls it a crown of the blind. And so it's very monstrous. It has tentacles. In short, it's kind of like every horrifying thing you can imagine all put together. And so together, the group kills the monster, and it only leaves behind a skin. So it's kind of, again, like a snake shedding. Dorian is no closer to understanding what the monster was, though he recalls that a Mortalitasi once told him of things, quote, past the veil of our world, neither demon or spirit. So that's where they kind of land. This monster is neither demon nor spirit. It's something horrible from beyond the veil. And it is able to kind of talk to you. It tries to convince Hollix to stop fighting and join it, and just to succumb basically to the monster. And so there is a level of sentience to the monster. There is a level of like being able to like try to convince you. I'm sure a very weak-willed person would be more susceptible to that than somebody who has more of a strong will. So that's kind of how this story plays out. So the characters are quote unquote Hollix, as we know that may or may not be their real name. We have Dorian, Maevaris, Mizzy, and Kekarax. So I have a few things that I want to talk about, but why don't you go first if you have anything interesting, reflection that you want to bring up?
My reflection after this one is really just that there's so much in Thedas we don't know. There's so many mysteries. There are so many things that exist, just like our world. There are so many things that we have yet to discover or yet to know. We don't know everything, but there are places of the world that we have never been to. Because I feel like Inquisition really made the world a lot smaller. And so I appreciate this story in making it bigger.
Yeah, I agree. I do feel like it makes the world bigger. I very much agree with you on that aspect. So, okay, one thing that I find very interesting about this chapter is, and this is going to tie into, I think, our third episode, but in the beginning, before Hollix starts, they're spying on like a game night that Dorian and Maevaris are hosting, and so they're like in the rafters listening in on Dorian and Maevaris's friends and like listening to the gossip. And so one of the things that one of the gossiping mages says and talks about is Ambrose Forfex, the wig maker. And they say something to the effect of, did you hear what happened to him? And what happens to him is in the wig maker job chapter later in this book, like 100 pages later, he dies because Lucanus kills him. Spoiler. It implies that these chapters are not occurring in chronological order, because if they're gossiping about what happened to Ambrose before we read about Ambrose, that means that this chapter, Luck in the Gardens, happens after the wig maker job. So this sent me into a tailspin. What is the order chronologically of these chapters? I need a date. Please give me a month and a year for each one of these. So now I'm like, are some of these years before some of the others? We have no idea. So that really sent me for a loop.
I can tell that Tevinter Nights has taken a lot of inspiration from the first two Witcher books, which are a collection of short stories that take place in all kinds of chronological order, which if you've watched the show can be really confusing until you realize that the episodes aren't in chronological order.
Mm-hmm.
I think what helps with this is we don't have a lot of repeating characters across stories. So it's easier to like keep track, like, oh, this is a separate story. But yeah, I like the mention. It's foreshadowing, definitely. But it's like, okay, foreshadowing. Okay, we're going to have another chapter in a little bit that's going to talk exactly about this little gossip thing.
Right. But like, it's so minuscule that if this wasn't my multiple, like if I hadn't read this 2-3 times now, I wouldn't have caught up on that. There are a lot of things that I picked up on in this that I never would have noticed the first read. And that's one of them. Now, the other thing I have is a little bit of a crack theory. So you're going to have to bear with me. Now, I'm going to explain it. Buckle up, buckle your seatbelts, hold on to your butts. I'm wondering if the narrator could possibly be our Qunari companion, Tosh. And at first you might be like, that's crazy. Doesn't Hollix appear as a human? Yes. But we know that Hollix dresses as a man in this and a woman. And so there's some gender fluidity here. We also know that Hollix is a code name. Like, it's not necessarily their real name. We also know that the main character is a Lord of Fortune. Tosh is also a Lord of Fortune. The reason I thought about this is because twofold. Emmerich has been highlighted in this. Lucanus is highlighted in this. Maybe Tosh is too. But also, there is a paragraph where Hollix is reflecting on the nature of disguises. And this is what is said. Well, of course, I can disguise myself as some of the other peoples. There are things the mind focuses on first, you see. We recognize dwarves by their width as well as their stature. Elves are slim, but it's their eyes and ears we recall. Humans have the most variety in the shoulders, and all anyone sees about Qunari are height and horns. And then it has just like a little M dash, and it moves to another paragraph and says, "What was that? Oh, yes, you're right. Enough boasting about my craft now. Back to the story." So the first mention of Qunari is like, immediately, we've got to shut that down. Let's move on to some other topic. I think that's very suspicious. Now, I realize, just being a Lord of Fortune, Hollix being a nickname, and suspicious behavior about Qunari is not really a lot to go on. But combine that with the fact that they have given us a lot of information about every other companion and really almost none about Tosh is a little suspicious. So maybe I'm wrong. I'm okay if I'm wrong. That's fine. But I think that this is a possibility that we maybe shouldn't discount entirely.
I definitely see the theory and the support here for it. Definitely see that in there. And I think that maybe perhaps that she is a dragon hunter associated with the Lords of Fortune is why Dorian and Maevaris assigned them Hollix this task. Because if you can take down a dragon,
you should be able to take down some weird demon thing from the beyond. Yeah, I get that. I definitely get that. Cool. So do you have any other thoughts or things you want to talk about with this chapter before we give our ratings?
I don't think so.
All right. So what's your rating?
I'd give this one a 4.
Okay. I think I am.
Yeah, I don't. The reason I give a 4 is I do like the story. I'm not a huge fan of first-person narrative, which is really strange because one of my favorite book series is the Percy Jackson series, and that's first-person narrative. But it's like not my go-to of what I want to read.
Yeah. I do think it can be a little bit jarring, especially when we've had 4 chapters up to this point that have been in third person. It was a big change. So, okay. Let's go through our overarching ratings of these 5 chapters. So for me, I gave 3 Trees to Midnight a 5, Down Among the Dead Men a 4, Horror of Hormak a 5, Callback a 3, and then Luck in the Gardens a 3.5, which comes to a 20.5, which is about a 4.1 overall. What about you?
Total of 22.5 for me, which is a 4.5 average.
I think these chapters, and I apply this to all of Tevinter Nights, I really think that this is the most well-written book that we have in the Dragon Age universe. And these 5 chapters are really strong. I think the last 5 are probably going to be my highest rated, but they're all really good.
I think a lot of times this is what people really want out of a video game world book, is just like little stories that expand the world. I mean, I appreciate the stories that like dive deeper into characters, but at the end of the day, like the things I really want are things that expand the world a lot more. And I think that you get a lot less of that in a singular character story versus like an anthology like this one.
Yeah, I do agree with that. I hear what you're saying. So, okay, let's talk about any kind of overarching themes that you're noticing throughout the 5 of these, and just really any other final reflections, thoughts, patterns you're seeing in these 5 chapters.
This theme comes from also from the short stories as well. Something is wrong with the forests in Thetis.
Okay.
Well, because there's that whole short story that says something is deeply wrong with Arlathan Forest. And then we have Forest in Three Trees to Midnight. We have the Navaran Forest in Horrors of Hormak and everything like that. Like, so the trees are not having a great time.
That's fair. And I think we'll probably get in more to that in the next episode, because there's a few more set in forests that we'll see. So I don't necessarily disagree with that. I think that corruption is a huge theme in this, from, you know, the Tevinter society who don't want to hunt down these monsters plaguing the city, which again, we'll talk about next time. Regret is obviously another huge part of this with the demon, but also, you know, with other parts. You know, Ramesh reflects on how he should have had the courage to, you know, confess his feelings to Jovis, and you know, all of Callback is about regret. But that theme, I think, is throughout the whole entire book. And I think that there's a lot of reflection on identity, and not necessarily in, oh, I'm a human or I'm an elf, more so along the lines of like, these are the groups I've chosen to belong to, whether it's, you know, Tevinter Magisters or the Dalish or City Elves or the Lords of Fortune or whatever other group, the Mournwatch. There's a lot of reflection, and I'm not sure if it's intentional as much as it is they're just trying to showcase different groups within Thetis, but I do think that that's a big theme of these 5 chapters.
Corruption and all of that stuff is really big, but also like furthermore about, I want to explain, because we didn't talk about this in this chapter, but the whole scene with Strife and the Forest Guardian. When I read that for the first time, I thought, is this a Sylvan? Because we haven't seen a Sylvan mentioned in a long time in Dragon Age. But the Forest Guardian, but the fact that Strife was like, no, this Forest Guardian should have left me alone, but didn't, like, implies that like something is wrong with the order of the world. And I think that's another big theme that's across these stories.
Yeah, absolutely. And like the order of the world is falling apart everywhere, not just in Arlathan, not just in Tevinter, not just with the Qunari. Like every people group is struggling with these same things because Solus is tearing apart the fabric of the world. Like that's just why. And that impacts everything. And we're totally seeing that. So that's another really important call out. I think that's all we've got for this episode. So Austin, if you're ready, we can kind of wrap it up.
Yeah. So thank you for compiling this list. I really appreciated talking about these stories and all of that. Like I said, this will be a 3-part episode. So we're going to have more Tevinter Nights for the next 3 weeks as we dive through all of these stories. You can find this book in hard copy. There is a Kindle version. I do not believe there is an audiobook version of this book, at least.
I don't think so.
But you can find it in both ebook and hard copy if you want to pick that up anywhere and do that and read along with us. But thank you so much for listening to the Dragon Age Lorecast. We'll see you next time. Thanks for listening to the Dragon Age Lorecast. You can find us on Twitter at DA Lorecast.
If you have any lore questions, topics to unpack, or side character suggestions, join our Cups Podcasting and More Discord server. It's easily the best place on the internet. You can also support us financially through our Patreon. You can find us there on patreon.com/DragonAgeLorecast.
The Dragon Age Lorecast is part of the Robots Radio Network. For more information about the Robots Radio Network, join the Discord server via the link in our episode description.
If you enjoyed the show or learned something new today, please subscribe, leave us a review, and join the Patreon. And if you enjoyed our intro and outro music, give a big thank you to Pipeman Studios. Thank you, Pipeman. Thanks again for listening to the Dragon Age Lorecast. We'll see you next time.
Are you a fan of Elden Ring? Are you confused about the lore as pretty much everyone else? We've got you covered. Check out the Elden Archives, a lore podcast that helps to explain every little confusing detail about the lands between. Things like what exactly happened on the Night of the Black Knives, or what we really know about characters like Mikola. Just like the show you're listening to now, we're on the Robots Radio Network, so you know it'll be good. Wondering how to find the show? Easy. Either go to robotsradio.net or search Elden Archives on whatever podcatcher you're using right now. Bookmark the show for later, and we'll see you in the lands between. Again, that's the Elden Archives, a FromSoft Lorecast available everywhere.